The clinking of silverware against fine china echoed in the cavernous dining room. A counterpoint to the low murmur of polite conversation. Victoria Thorne. Her back ramrod straight, her expression carefully neutral. Felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. After 15 grueling years, 15 years of sacrifice and relentless dedication, she had finally steered Sterling Industries, her father's faltering manufacturing firm, to an unprecedented valuation, $90 million. It was a triumph, a testament to her acumen, her grit, her sheer refusal to let the company, her family's legacy, crumble. Tonight, however, was not a celebration of her achievement. It was a prelude to her dismantling. The long mahogany table, polished to a mirror sheen, reflected the flickering candlelight and the faces of the assembled guests. Extended family, key investors, and the board of directors of Sterling Industries. All were gathered under the pretense of honoring the company's remarkable turnaround. But Victoria knew the real purpose of this opulent gathering. Her father, Reginald Thorne, a man whose presence commanded attention even in his late 70s, was about to make an announcement. Reginald cleared his throat, the sound amplified by the room's hushed anticipation. He surveyed the table, his gaze lingering for a moment on Victoria, a flicker of, what? Pity? Regret? It was gone so quickly, she couldn't be sure. Then, his eyes settled on his son, Julian. As many of you know, Reginald began, his voice a resonant baritone that still held the steel of his prime. Sterling Industries has been a family endeavor for 3 generations. We've weathered storms, navigated treacherous markets, and emerged stronger than ever. He paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. And now, it's time for the next generation to take the helm. Victoria's grip tightened on her water glass. She knew what was coming. She'd felt it in the subtle shifts in her father's demeanor, in the increasingly frequent calls between Reginald and Julian, in the way the board members had started to subtly defer to her brother, even in matters where he had no expertise. Reginald placed a hand on Julian's shoulder, a gesture of paternal pride and implicit endorsement. I'm proud to announce that Julian will be stepping in as the new CEO of Sterling Industries. The words were like a physical blow. Victoria felt the blood drain from her face, her carefully constructed composure threatening to crack. But years of navigating the cutthroat world of corporate politics, of battling for every inch of ground in a male-dominated industry, had taught her to mask her emotions. She forced a smile, a brittle, practiced expression that betrayed none of the turmoil raging within her. Around the table, a ripple of polite applause and murmured congratulations spread. Julian, ever the charmer, offered a self-deprecating smile, as if embarrassed by the praise. But Victoria saw the glint of triumph in his eyes, the barely concealed smirk that spoke volumes. Julian had never shown any real interest in Sterling Industries. He'd drifted through a series of expensive hobbies and ill-fated ventures, funded by the family fortune. He'd dabbled in art, dabbled in film production, dabbled in a disastrous tech startup that had evaporated millions. He possessed none of Victoria's sharp intellect, her tireless work ethic, or her deep understanding of the manufacturing industry. He had, however, the one advantage that trumped all others in Reginald's eyes: he was the male heir. Victoria's mother, Beatrice, caught her eye from across the table. Beatrice's expression was unreadable, a carefully guarded mask of neutrality. But Victoria knew her mother saw. Beatrice had always seen the sacrifices Victoria had made, the relentless hours she'd poured into the company, the personal life she'd largely foregone. But Beatrice, like Reginald, was a creature of tradition. She wouldn't interfere. She never did. To Julian, Victoria said, raising her glass, her voice remarkably steady. And to the continued success of Sterling Industries. The guests echoed her toast, oblivious to the undercurrents of betrayal and simmering resentment that flowed beneath the surface of the polite gathering. Only Julian met her gaze, his smirk widening. He knew. He knew that she knew. And he reveled in it. That night, sleep eluded Victoria. She tossed and turned, the events of the evening replaying in her mind like a recurring nightmare. The image of her father's hand on Julian's shoulder. The sound of his voice proclaiming his son as the new CEO. The smug look on Julian's face, it all fueled a burning rage within her. She had given everything to Sterling Industries. She had joined the company straight out of business school, eager to prove herself, to contribute to the family legacy. But she hadn't simply joined, she had transformed it. The company her father had built was a regional player, struggling to compete in a rapidly changing market. She had modernized it, streamlined its operations, secured lucrative contracts, and expanded its reach across the nation. She had implemented cutting-edge technology, navigated complex labor negotiations, and weathered a global recession that had brought many of their competitors to their knees. And now, it was all being handed to Julian, a man who had contributed nothing, who knew nothing, who would likely run the company into the ground within a year. By 4 a.m., Victoria was sitting at her desk in her home office, her eyes burning with fatigue but her mind racing. She scrolled through files on her computer, reviewing contracts, financial statements, shareholder agreements. She knew Sterling Industries inside and out, every detail, every clause, every loophole. Julian might think he was inheriting a thriving company, but he was inheriting a complex machine, one that required a skilled operator to maintain. And Victoria was the only one who knew how all the pieces fit together. She had spent 15 years not just building a company, but building her position within it. She had anticipated this moment, not with certainty, but with a cautious awareness that her father's traditional views might one day override his judgment. She had taken steps, subtle but significant, to protect herself, to ensure that she wouldn't be simply cast aside. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, Victoria found what she was looking for. A series of documents, meticulously drafted and legally binding, that detailed the ownership structure of Sterling Industries. Documents that Julian, and perhaps even Reginald, had overlooked. The next morning, Victoria arrived at Sterling Industries headquarters precisely at 8:30 a.m. As she always did. The building, a sleek, modern structure of glass and steel, was a testament to her vision. It was a far cry from the cramped, outdated facility her father had operated in for decades. The receptionist, a young woman named Hannah, greeted her with a hesitant smile. The news of Julian's appointment had already spread through the company like wildfire. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty, with whispers and speculation. Victoria ignored the whispers. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking on the polished marble floor, her back straight, her head held high. She was not walking into her office. She was walking into a battleground. She entered her office, the expansive space with its panoramic city views, and closed the door behind her. She had exactly 30 minutes before Reginald and Julian were scheduled to arrive, expecting a smooth handover, a seamless transition of power. They were in for a rude awakening. She sat at her desk, a massive, custom-made piece of furniture that reflected her power and authority. She opened her laptop and pulled up the documents she had reviewed the night before. Shareholder agreements, executive contracts, legal filings, all meticulously organized and ready for deployment. At precisely 9 a.m., there was a knock on her door. Victoria didn't respond. The door opened, and Reginald and Julian strode in, both exuding an air of confidence. Reginald, as always, looked impeccable in his tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. Julian, dressed in a designer suit that likely cost more than most of the employees' monthly salaries, wore a smug, self-satisfied grin. Victoria, Reginald said, his voice a blend of paternal authority and condescension. I trust you're prepared for the transition. Victoria leaned back in her chair, her expression carefully neutral. Transition? An interesting choice of words, father. Julian's grin widened. Don't be difficult, Victoria. This is happening. It's for the best. For the best? Victoria echoed, raising an eyebrow. For whom, exactly? Reginald frowned, his patience clearly wearing thin. Victoria, this is not up for discussion. We've made our decision. Ah, yes, Victoria said softly. The decision. The thing is, father, you don't have the sole authority to make that decision. Julian scoffed. Don't be ridiculous. Father is the founder, the chairman. Victoria cut him off. And I, she said, her voice gaining strength, am the majority shareholder. The silence in the room was deafening. Reginald's face paled slightly. Julian's smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of disbelief. What are you talking about? Julian demanded. Victoria reached for the remote control on her desk and pressed a button. The large screen on the wall behind her flickered to life, displaying a document titled Sterling Industries Shareholder Agreement, Amended. This document, Victoria explained, her voice calm and controlled, was drafted and signed 5 years ago, during the company's restructuring. It clearly states that any transfer of executive power, such as the appointment of a new CEO, requires the approval of the majority shareholders. She tapped the screen, highlighting a specific clause. As you can see, I hold 65% of the company's shares. Julian stepped forward, his eyes scanning the document with frantic intensity. Reginald stood frozen, his expression a mixture of shock and dawning realization. That's impossible, Julian stammered. It's quite possible, Victoria countered. Over the years, while you were busy pursuing your hobbies, and father was busy attending galas and giving speeches, I was doing something else. I was securing my position. She turned to Reginald. Remember the capital infusion we needed in 2018, father? You signed over an additional 20% of your shares to me in exchange for my investment. And in 2020, during the legal battle with Anderson Manufacturing, another 15% was transferred to me as collateral, which you never reclaimed. That, combined with my original 30%, makes me the majority shareholder. Reginald's jaw clenched. He knew she was right. He had been so focused on grooming Julian, on maintaining the patriarchal line of succession, that he had overlooked the details. The fine print. He had underestimated his daughter. Julian, however, was still in denial. You can't do this, he sputtered. This is our family's company. Victoria pulled up another document, a legal filing with the state, verifying her ownership stake. It was our family's company, Julian. Now, it's my company. She stood up, her gaze sweeping over both men. I'm not firing you, Julian, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. You can stay on, in an advisory role. A very limited advisory role. You will report to me. You will follow my directives. Or, she added, gesturing towards the door, you can leave. I'll buy out your shares at market value. You can take the money and find another project to occupy your time. Julian turned to Reginald, his eyes pleading for help, for intervention. But Reginald remained silent. He knew he had been outmaneuvered. He had no recourse. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. Julian, his face contorted with rage and humiliation, finally spoke. This isn't over, he hissed. You'll regret this. Victoria let out a soft, humorless laugh. Regret? I doubt it. I built this company, Julian. I saved it. I made it what it is today. You were merely inheriting a title. I earned it. Julian stormed out of the office, his expensive shoes slamming against the floor. Reginald lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on Victoria. He looked older, defeated. "You've changed, Victoria," he said quietly. Victoria met his gaze, her expression unwavering. "No, father. I've simply stopped pretending." Then, he too, left. Victoria sat back down in her chair, the adrenaline slowly fading, leaving her feeling drained but strangely calm. She had won. She had secured her position, her legacy. But the victory felt hollow. She had alienated her family, perhaps irrevocably. She looked around her office, at the symbols of her success, at the view of the city sprawling below. She had built an empire. But she had built it alone. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Victoria consolidated her power, restructuring the company, replacing key executives who were loyal to Reginald and Julian with people she trusted. She implemented new strategies, launched new initiatives, and set ambitious goals for the future. She also faced a barrage of criticism and accusations. Julian, true to his word, launched a smear campaign, painting himself as the victim of a ruthless power grab. He contacted family members, investors, and even the media, spreading lies and distortions. Reginald, while not actively participating in Julian's campaign, did nothing to stop it. He remained silent, a passive observer to the unfolding drama. Victoria, however, was not deterred. She had anticipated this. She had built a fortress around herself and Sterling Industries, one that could withstand any attack. She called an emergency meeting of the board of directors. She presented them with irrefutable evidence of her accomplishments, of the company's financial success under her leadership, and of Julian's incompetence and lack of experience. She also revealed the details of her father's questionable financial dealings in the past, dealings that she had quietly rectified over the years. She exposed his mismanagement, his reckless spending, and his near bankruptcy of the company before she had intervened. The board, faced with overwhelming evidence, had no choice but to support her. They voted unanimously to confirm her as CEO and to remove Julian from any position of authority. Victoria then turned her attention to the media. She hired a top public relations firm and launched a counteroffensive. She gave interviews, issued press releases, and presented a clear, concise, and compelling narrative of her leadership and her vision for the future of Sterling Industries. She highlighted her accomplishments, her dedication, and her commitment to the company's employees and customers. She painted a picture of a strong, capable, and visionary leader, one who had rescued the company from the brink of disaster and transformed it into a thriving enterprise. The tide began to turn. The media, initially skeptical, started to portray her as a brilliant and determined businesswoman, a force to be reckoned with. Investors, reassured by her leadership and the company's strong performance, regained their confidence. Within a few months, the storm had passed. Julian, his reputation tarnished and his credibility destroyed, retreated into obscurity. Reginald, his legacy in tatters, remained isolated and embittered. Victoria, however, had emerged stronger than ever. She had weathered the crisis, silenced her critics, and secured her position as the undisputed leader of Sterling Industries. A year later, Sterling Industries had reached a new milestone, a valuation of $120 million. Victoria had not only maintained the company's success, but she had surpassed it. She had achieved what her father had only dreamed of. She stood on the balcony of her penthouse apartment, overlooking the city lights. She held a glass of champagne in her hand, a toast to her triumph. She had achieved everything she had set out to do. She had built a legacy. But she had built it at a cost. She had lost her family, her connection to her past. She wondered if it was worth it. She wondered if she would ever find true satisfaction, true fulfillment. She took a sip of champagne, the bubbles tickling her tongue. She had no answers. only the quiet, persistent ache of loneliness, a constant reminder of the price of power. The city lights blurred, and for a brief moment, she thought she saw a flicker. Not of triumph, but of something else entirely, a profound, unshakable sadness. It was the price tag of her throne. A throne built on the ashes of familial trust. And a very personal, very costly victory. The future stretched before her, a vast, unknown territory, filled with both promise and peril. She would navigate it. As she had navigated everything else, with strength, determination, and a quiet, unwavering resolve. But she would navigate it alone.